Uh, back in when the independence movement and Mahatma Gandhi's role, Nehru's role in it was critical for what followed afterwards. There was a commitment to democracy which India had never had before, but began to have in a limited way after the 1935 Act. There were some local elections. But by then the United Nations had come up with the Charter of Human Rights, and this in a sense, I mean, you had the Constituent Assembly creating this thing called the Constitution, which very few people have read, but perhaps some of you have actually looked at, which lays down extremely detailed things. The fundamental thing is, I would say, the importance of individual rights. There are group rights also. And one famous justice said, individual rights are human rights, group rights are politics. So whether the group is a political party, a caste, a religion, all of those kinds of groups, that is politics. It is seen as very important. I regret to say, the way our judges are going today, many of them are upholding group rights and violating. I mean, just the other day we had the Bombay High Court banning any demonstration on behalf of Gaza. They said, why do you want to talk about something in a distant land? Why don't you focus on civic problems? I mean, to me, this is not the job of the court. The job of the court is to ensure the freedom. But one huge thing that has changed, Nehru ushered in. Nehru was a qualified political success, if you like. He established a democracy which was very rare. If you just look at the history of all the countries that became independent after being decolonized, to be a secular, genuine democracy. I mean, everybody had elections and they were all fixed, whether in Africa. So, you know, having elections was a farce. But he created the separate institutions and upheld the independence. Whether it was the media, whether it was the judiciary, the checks and balances, the fact that there were state governments with opposition people out there. So you had opposition parties also tasting power, even while one party was in power for a very long time at the center. And in this, India was in some places upheld as being fantastically good to the rule of law. That has all gone now. We know that we are many of the ideals of the Constitution are gone. The idea that we should be a secular country is fundamentally gone. The idea that there should be no discrimination, which is supposed to be the most fundamental right, that is gone. The whole thing is that everything should be on the basis of caste. This will be reserved, that will be reserved, this particular subsidy will be given to this guy, this particular. The notion that everything will be independent, there will be no norms of discrimination on the basis of caste, religion, gender, place of work. All four have been violated right now. So we are no longer that same equal society laid down. And the erosion has taken place basically in the last 20 years. It was till 2000, I would say, we were more or less on track, and completely gone the other way. The demand for a kind of Hindu state is so enormous. So India, instead of being seen as So India, instead of being seen as a large secular state, as a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, is basically saying this is a Hindu place which had been invaded by Muslims and Christians, and we have to return to the great Hindu thing. So all the fundamentals that get destroyed of equality, it has. And what happened, I had thought that the courts earlier on would uphold the Constitution. But what happens in the politics of every country, I find, is if the political mood shifts, the courts also begin to shift, the media begin to shift, the college students bring. I mean, so because this new dispensation has been now there for more than 10 years, the tectonic shift of all the institutions, including, as I said, what the Bombay High Court came up with the other day, an outrage. I mean, in India, we have seen demonstrations against Vietnam, against the invasion of Iraq. I mean, there was on so many, to say just because something is taking place, the Bombay High Court was very worried, this may affect, our image, and the government is trying to do something. You may be interfering. I mean, why not? What is the meaning of individual rights if you cannot demonstrate on a particular thing? I mean, we're not just planning an explosion somewhere. You're demonstrating. Even that is not being allowed. And of course, you are aware of various judgments. I mean, we now have a situation where if Kamaria is going in some particular place, the Muslims are supposed to put up a sign and they have to swear not to serve this kind of food. I mean, all those individual freedoms being subjugated to a Hindu fundament. So that, broadly speaking, is the big change that has taken place on the political side. On the economic side, we started in 1947 between the two world wars. In fact, at the first half of the 20th century, capitalism got itself a very bad name. You had a Great Depression and two wars. And what came up was, on the one hand, a very successful Nazism in Germany, Italy, and on the other hand, communism coming up in Russia. And while Subhash Chandra Bose is generally hailed as a very, very great Indian hero, if you actually go into his writings, you will find there a contempt for capitalism, and he wanted to create a new mix of fascism and communism, more towards fascism than communism, I would say. Because, I mean, big historians like A.J.P. Taylor and Toynbee and so on, they were all saying this capitalism is finished. The Soviet model of planning at that point of time was regarded with enormous respect because of the success it had achieved in enabling the Soviet Union to beat Hitler. The way the Second World War was taught to me, we were taught that, basically the Western Allies won the war against Hitler. When I read more, I discovered this was crap. Basically, the Soviet Union beat Hitler. And this was the most backward country in the whole of Europe in 1917 when the Bolshevik Revolution took place. So for that very backward thing to become sufficiently powerful to have taken on Hitler and beaten him, there was an enormous amount of respect that this system of planning must be having something to it. And the persons impressed were not just Jawaharlal Nehru, who of course was highly impressed by it. Paul Samuelson is one of the greatest Western economists, and his textbook called Economics was my textbook when I was at college in 1962. And it had a chart showing the United States, which is already rich, going like this, and the Soviet Union from here coming and cutting it and overtaking it. There was this notion that the Soviet planning system was fundamentally superior and would therefore overtake it. And if you just looked at the figures, Soviet Union claimed to be rising at 6-7% a year when other countries were doing 2-3%. And the Sputnik, I remember when it went up, we had a heartbeat. My God, something is coming from outer space. Today, nobody thinks twice about it, but in those days, something coming from outer space, then you put a man in space. So the Soviet Union looked the peak. It's very difficult for you to learn that, and we said, let's adopt that kind of system. To begin with, in the first plan, Nehru was achieving a growth rate of almost 4%. In the first half of the 20th century, growth was about 1.3% per year, and population growth was more than 1. I mean, per capita growth was virtually zero. So when the growth increased from 1.3% to 3.5%, Nehru said, "I am a champion." Lots of people praised India's performance. They said, "Fantastic, how things have changed." W. Arthur Lewis was a Nobel laureate. I remember he had hypothesized that it might actually be possible for GDP growth to be faster than population growth, disturbing the Malthusian thing. Any growth of GDP at all, he thought was a great feat. So compared to that, what Nehru was achieving looked pretty good. So later on, when Singapore, Korea and others came around and started growing at 7-8%, it is very difficult to call somebody class topper and then change your mind and say, actually, he's a dunce. Very difficult to make the change. So since Nehru had been praised so widely for so long, when they looked at these other countries coming up, they said, small little fellows, all these guys, they will become pawns of neo-colonialism. And the colonialism very strong. India had got independence, but they were very suspicious that these colonial forces will come back. So there was the notion that to buttress political independence, we must have economic independence, which at that time, they meant we will have less and less foreign trade, less and less foreign investment. We will do more and more of it all by ourselves. That way we will have economic independence. Especially Nehru had this notion of machinery, we must make machinery. He didn't like the idea that we were importing machinery. So all I can say is that in due course, the Indian model, which had looked pretty good, began to come under considerable strain. At the time of independence, we had a huge amount of what were called sterling reserves. These were IOUs written by the British government to us for the goods that they were buying from India during World War II. And they said, you can redeem it later, but only by buying British goods. So we said, fine, we'll buy machinery and other things. So the fact that Nehru wanted to get away from foreign trade, the fact that they said, exports are unimportant, in fact, we would not like to increase exports and get into international. So the export pessimism, saying it is neither possible nor desirable to have a huge rise, that led to this, the sterling balances began to get depleted. To begin with, there was so much that nobody noticed what was happening. That what was happening was, okay, you're going ahead and trying to grow faster, you're investing more. But I'm sorry. 1 second. I'm sorry, I'm suffering from a particular thing. I just get this fit of kind of dizziness in the head. I can. Sorry, sorry. What was I saying? Yes. So the sterling balances were coming down, and suddenly in by 56 to 58, they completely ran out. And when they ran out, this great plan that we had. See, all this talk about self-sufficiency, and you didn't notice that this is what you call self-sufficiency was actually dependence on sterling reserves. And then suddenly we found, how do we carry on with our plan? It was impossible to carry on with the plan. We were supposed to import so much machinery, we had no foreign exchange. At that point, the United States, which was not well regarded in India, came to the rescue. The United States earlier had taken the position that we should see this as a great battle between good and bad, and that the good is the West, the bad is the Soviet Union, and therefore all of you must be with us. If you are not with us, you are against us. Whereas we said, no, we will not be with you, and we will not. So we prided ourselves on refusing to give in to the American pressure. But at the same time, when the foreign exchange crisis came and we had no foreign exchange by 1958, Eisenhower, looking all over the place, said, people are looking at Red China and India, the two large countries that have become independent and are growing. We can't allow a situation to come where it seems as though the Chinese model is successful and the Indian one is not. And so he created the Aid India Consortium, where a large number of countries would start lending. I mean, at that time, I remember the World Bank, headed by Mr. Eugene Black, was dead against giving foreign aid. Because they said at that time, we have to establish the credibility of the World Bank itself, which was borrowing on the market. And they said we only lend to very, very good people like France and Germany who are recovering from the war, and we don't give foreign aid, we don't give anything concessional. But then Mr. Eisenhower turned around and said, sorry, Mr. Black, from tomorrow you're going to be in favor of foreign aid. And the saying goes that Mr. Black turned white and said, yes, sir. So the Aid India Consortium was then formed, which started giving. So in some sense, India was being hailed as a great success. On the other hand, it was a miserable failure, because if you were dependent on foreign aid, what has happened to this great self-sufficiency and independence? What is this great talk, I will not be with this guy, I will not be that with. Then came the 65 war with Pakistan. At that point, the Aid India Consortium of both India and Pakistan said, okay, we are going to stop aid to both of you until this war is over. And secondly, for a resumption of aid, there had been IMF teams and so on, which has said, in those were days of fixed exchange rates, no floating exchange rates. And this is, India needs a large devaluation in order to increase its exports. This is the kind of thing that Nehru and the left was dead against, because if you devalue, anything you import becomes more expensive, including agricultural goods and other things. So they were dead against it. So the IMF came up with saying you need a devaluation of 57%, a very huge percent, which was duly done as a condition for resuming foreign aid. So India did the thing, foreign aid resumed, and after a gap of a few years, India began to improve again on the basis of a completely new bunch of exports, like engineering exports, which had become economic because of the devaluation. Meanwhile, the other thing that was once again done with American aid, and not in terms of self-sufficiency, was the development of the new varieties for the Green Revolution. And that place where we had been in such tough difficulty, because India had become totally dependent on American food aid as well. It was not just foreign exchange for importing stuff, food. So the supposedly self-sufficient great economy we were creating had become totally dependent. I'm glad to say that we took the position in the fourth plan that we are going to halve foreign aid and then finally do away with it. It didn't quite get done, but both on the food side and on the foreign exchange side, we did it considerably. I mention this because I was once at an African meeting with African ministers when I was working for the World Bank at that time. And I was, for some reason, asked to talk. And I said, why are you guys fixated on foreign aid? All of you are having your entire education system or your entire health system financed by foreign aid. Surely you have to do it with itself. I said, why did we demand independence? We said we will be better without you. We didn't say that, we will become independent and then we will become totally dependent on our foreign aid. This is not what the argument was. And the reactions of the South Africans said, how is this person being allowed to speak? Various other guys said, foreign aid should be used well, but we need foreign aid. And one guy said, on the way, we were exploited under colonialism, they have to pay it back. I said, that's a very dangerous argument because, you were colonized for much less than India and Singapore, and you will also have to explain why Singapore, which was colonized for the largest time, has become the most prosperous and not the worst because of colonial exploitation. So, all these apart, we finally began to move towards a kind of self-sufficiency, and that self-sufficiency was married to Garibi Hatao. There was the notion that the problem in India, the way to raise poverty is that you put huge restrictions. The private sector was not banned, but the public sector was supposed to have the commanding heights, do all the main things. The private sector would be there, but you can't allow them to be rich. We will put very high taxes. Indira Gandhi's tax went as high as 97.75%. While all this attracted the left and the Congress socialists, frankly, this was a... Do we have time? Shall I? Okay, just a little more. So anyway, at the end of it all, because Garibi Hatao failed, the best example of failure is as follows. Between 1947 and say 1977, 30 years, the GDP per head, or the poverty ratio, some studies said that while it went up and down with the monsoon, the overall trend was zero. The poverty ratio essentially remained unchanged for 30 years. Meanwhile, population almost doubled. What did this mean? In absolute terms, the number of poor people doubled. I mean, it's an astonishing result for a Garibi Hatao program. It was had anybody said this in 1947, you would have been called a British chamcha. That that the number of poor people will double after independence. That is what actually happened to a government committed to removing poverty, and fundamentally showed you that this is the wrong path to go by. So some kind of liberalization began in 1980s of very small nature. Rajiv Gandhi, I would say, was by nature a liberalizer. He was also a dunce, so he didn't have a courage of conviction. He was kind of and it would be a very good thing if he had been brighter, but he allowed himself to be overruled on many occasions. But then what finally happened was, in the 1980s, by more and more borrowing, more and more deficit financing, India was increasing its growth rate. It's always possible for a limited time. But at the end of it all, you were borrowing from abroad and you didn't have the capacity to repay. So finally, your foreign exchange reserves, when the price of oil went up, you went bust in 1991. By a coincidence, the Soviet Union and the communists, they had gone bust at the same time. So everybody said the basic change is required, and you can't go even more to the left, although many of the communist parties were in favor of that. They said that's the solution. But more in sorrow than in triumph, the Indian politicians turned to the right. That particular process, initially people said this will not work. Like Latin America and Africa, you will have a decade of destroyed growth. There were other people theorizing that reforms have never worked in a democracy. It can be imposed harsh discipline, but not in a democracy. All these arguments were put forward. But to our surprise, within 3 years, the economy began to grow at 7.1%. From 1994 to 97, economic GDP growth suddenly shot up to about 7%. At that point, it was impossible to turn it around. Earlier in 1991, opposition parties had sworn that we are going to reverse all the reforms that Mr. Narasimha Rao is trying to build up. But because it had succeeded, it couldn't be done. And then ultimately it became that this is the direction in which we are going. So one way or the other, that is the direction in which the economy has been going ever since 1991. You have managed to reform a large number of areas. Some areas are still significantly unreformed, notably land, notably labor. But the amount of reform and outward lookingness uncovered a new resource in India which had never been thought about as a resource. Resources were supposed to be capital or labor. Entrepreneurship was not seen as a resource. By opening this up, we have managed to harness the entrepreneurship, and that has been a stunning success. Earlier large areas of critical development were reserved for the government, not only because they were strategic, but also they required massive capital investment, something like space. So Mr. Modi says, I will open up space to the private sector. We all smiled and said, who can do it? 200 applications. 200 applications for space. I would never have believed it. But I said, this is the kind of thing that has now led to the new startup culture, and we have 67 to 100 unicorns, as they say it. Uh, these are unlisted companies valued at $1 billion. I'm sure there is a lot of exaggeration in the value, but it giving you an idea of this huge resource, human resource, which lay hidden all this time, because it was thought that bureaucrats and politicians, they have the talent, that they should be controlling what is done by whom, and that these masses are incapable. The notion that an ordinary Marwadi can be better than a Brahmina educated in St. Stephen's College is very difficult to stomach, but that ultimately got demonstrated. In my own school, I remember, all the children in businessmen were duds. And the idea that we will be working for these duds in later life, it was enough to turn some of us into communists. That's how it was in those days. And yet, it later turned out that they weren't duds. They just couldn't see the point of working hard because, they knew they were going to inherit the businesses anyway. Again, the sons of all the princes were there. They were all duds. Again, because they couldn't see the point of working hard. My friend Amarinder Singh, who later became Punjab Chief Minister, my classmate, duly failed. So your class of 1958, Amarinder Singh, fine. Then you look at the photograph. Class of 59, Amarinder Singh failed again. Class of 60, Amarinder Singh failed again. Then he didn't care. He was going to become Maharaja of Patiala and became head of the Congress party and ruled. And he even wrote a book for which was much, people said, Siana Admi, this guy must have been ghostwritten. That's how these things are done. And perhaps he wasn't as dumb as he played at all. He just couldn't see the point of study. So I said, I'm going over a long way, but ultimately we have arrived at this particular point of time. So you may say, initially we had a situation where politically we engineered a marvelous start, while economically we were stumbling. Right now we seem to have reversed that. Economically we are doing well, politically we are stumbling. So I better stop there.
Thank you very much, Swami.
My question, it stems from one concept, which is the India-British FTA trade, which is being discussed right now. And I would just love to hear your views on it. And at the same time, if you could perhaps expand, especially I would love it if you would expand upon the potential defense economy that will be affected by this, because as we know, because of the Ukraine war and everything, we are not able to get our marine engines, which we used to get from a Oh, it's fine.
Sorry, you were saying?
I was saying that I would also love it if you could maybe, while talking about the FTA, actually focus on the defense industry, because as we know, our marine engines, most of our naval engines and everything used to be sourced from Ukraine, but Ukraine can't do it anymore because of the war. And our current aircraft program, Tejas and everything, focuses their engines from GE Aerospace. And as we know, America is also not too open to trading because of political ramifications. The FTA will in turn open our market to Rolls-Royce for the marine engines and BAE for the aircraft engines, since they have experience. And I would love it if you could talk about it, its effects on our country.
Okay, I am not an expert on engines, but I will say this much. The EFTAs, this is a new free trade agreement with the UK. There was a time when trade with the UK was extremely important. It was obviously our top trading partner if you go back to 1947. Today, UK is not even in the top 10. Even worse for them, the UK hardly produces anything. Those great engineering companies like British Engineering, ICI, all closed down. The main exports of England have now become financial sector in London, Premier Football League, if you like, cricket test and sports, BBC, Financial Times, The Economist. So, the kind of things that they export, it is no longer an exporter of those kind of engineering goods which we used to import. I remember the two top British car manufacturers used to be Austin and Morris. Morris was there right in Oxford, right where I used to be studying when I was in Oxford. Both bust, both gone. So basically, what Britain is exports is what is made by Tata, for instance. Tata makes steel out there, and that is exported. Um, their main cars are Japanese and Korean. So that's how it's become in that particular country. You know, they've just got deindustrialized because it has become a successful service economy. Now, there are still some high-tech areas where referring to defense equipment. It's okay, but it is by no means famed for its defense. You know, basically what happened was, I mean, Trump is right. Just as Obama earlier, he says the Europeans just assume there is no such thing as war. And they really stopped producing defense equipment or very much and depended on the Americans. And now suddenly they find if the Americans want to pull out and they want to substitute the Americans in Ukraine, very difficult. They just don't have the stuff. I mean, people say you increase your defense spending. They say we would love to, but we don't have the capacity to increase the spending on these things. We don't make them anymore. So, just broadly speaking, the UK does not matter very much. In general, I would say the problem is that with Mr. Trump coming in, the fragmentation, everybody is saying strategic, and because of this, I'm going to put up import protectionist things, which is a bad thing. In the middle of all these bad things, if you have one free trade agreement, it's better than none. But it is not going to make very much difference.
Hello, sir. It's a pleasure to meet you. So my question is that poverty estimation is something. Poverty estimation, poverty estimation is something that has undergone a lot of evolution in the past many decades, and there have been so many committees that have come and gone. And right now, also we measure poverty. But what is your take on poverty measurement, and what should be the best way to go about it?
Measuring poverty has always been problematic. So basically, it has been done by surveys, household surveys. You send your guys, I mean, first you have to have a random model that we are not choosing people of a particular bias. And if it's completely random, you'd be surprised how small a model can be sufficient for a country of so many hundreds of millions. So I think it's 125,000. So anyway, the number is surprising. I remember when I was with the World Bank, one African country, only 7,000 household studies. That's enough for the estimating the consumption trends for the entire country. So we have household surveys. The problem with these surveys is two. One is that the kind of questions, they will rarely be comprehensive. Number two, all this is voluntary. The rich people, if you're saying, can I interview, the fellow say, go to hell. I'm off to London for the weekend or whatever. So you'll find the rich, it's difficult to interview them. Secondly, the questions. The question is, how much dal have you bought? How much sugar have you bought? It does not say how many private jet planes did you buy. It will not say how many yachts did you buy. Again, it will say how much did you buy. It will not mention that my son has gone to London for weekend shopping and he may be buying rather than me. So, and with my money. So I said there are a number of problems. But in many other countries, you will find that approximately the difference between the national accounts, the GNP accounts and the surveys, how much is the consumption? You will find there is about a gap of 75%. The surveys will be 75% of what the national income statistics show. In India, it was about 80 and then 70, 60, 70. Now it's down to almost 40. So the problem in India is huge. Why is this happening? And of course, the number of people say you are missing out more and more of what the rich are consuming. Maybe, I don't know. It seems to me that you would be failing to capture the rich earlier too. I cannot see prima facie why the capture would be that much less. But the other thing that's happening is that we have begun to target the poor. The moment you target the poor with a subsidy or whatever, what is the incentive for the man to tell you the truth? Zero. So I had a nephew who was working with MKKS, this NGO in Rajasthan, in a village. And I put this question to him. I said, you know, if somebody comes and asks the villager, what is his income, will he tell the truth? My nephew thought. He says, if it's somebody else from the village, the man will exaggerate. just to show off, I'm how well off and I deserve a better son-in-law, etc. If it's anybody from outside, he'll say, I have nothing, just in case it's possible to get an additional subsidy or something. So that to me confirmed, I said it is not rational for a person to tell the truth. Why on earth should you tell the truth? So to my mind, after you started targeting especially food grains, which began in the late 1990s, and now more and more things are targeted. So we have ruined our thing by using this. Now the problem being there in Western countries, they have started using a mix of two things. They say we partly use household surveys and partly use what they call administrative data. In other words, if you do a household survey, it suggests that the total number of motorcycles bought is X. If you ask the manufacturer, he says we have sold 2X. So you take a mix of the two to try and get to the real position. So in India, I have argued that we should be taking in some administrative data also. At the end of it, there will always be some gray areas and argument for what you do about it. In any case, the question is, how serious is this? I mean, the Supreme Court asked this question the other day. It says, on the one hand, the government boasts that poverty has been abolished. On the other hand, you are giving 2/3 of the population free food grains on the ground that they need to be lifted out of poverty. What is the situation? And the answer is political. Economists may want to know what is the poverty line and how do we give to the poor. From the point of view of politician, if I am giving something, if I give it to 2/3 of the population, I will get more votes than if I only give it to 10% of the population. So targeting only the poor is not that popular politically. Say politically we want to do giveaways which cover so many people. So you get that kind of distortion and political that. Now I've probably been too technical, but I hope I've answered your question.
So my question is related to the point that you mentioned of self-sufficiency and how after liberalization the market opened and we moved away from self-sufficiency. But in the last 10 years, the initiative like Make in India has come, which are kind of inward looking again. So I want to understand what has been the impact of initiatives like Make in India on manufacturing sector particularly, and do we need such initiative? Do we need such inward looking initiative in today's time?
You will find in country after country there is this great fascination with manufacturing and great dissatisfaction with services. Services in something have come up on their own way without actual government control and so on, and there are many, many different kinds of services. Manufacturing, however, was also seen as mass employment. Back in the old days, you may know that there were agitations for a steel plant, and 100 people would be killed in the agitations, while Indira Gandhi would promise, okay, steel plant to you also, to you also, to you also. At one point she said, where will the fourth steel plant come up? She said, one will come up at Vizag, one in Salem, and one in Karnataka. In those days, you see, if you go back to Jamshedpur, the very first steel plant, there were no ancillaries of any kind, no support. So in effect, the steel plant was not just a steel plant, but it was a general engineering plant for producing anything and everything. It was very labor intensive. The technologies of those days were very labor intensive. So an entire city had to be built. An entire city was built in order to accommodate a steel. So there was this notion of gold will pour out if you set up a steel plant. That's why there was this agitation for steel plants all over. And in those days, I remember I visited Tata Steel, and I was appalled to hear that they were having as many as 70,000 employees. And the answer is, how do you manage to be viable? The answer, because we are competing with the Steel Authority of India, which is even more overburdened. So if you are competing with the public sector, making a profit is actually very, very easy. Because the aim of the steel plants had become jobs. You will find the same thing is true of the railways, hopelessly overmanned and will remain so because the aim is to give jobs. It's a patronized route. Similarly, in the manufacturing sector, there is the notion that a huge amount of jobs can be created. I can claim credit for it and get some political returns. So this has taken place at two levels. One is individual handicrafts people. Gandhi came up on the idea of hand-spun cotton. Every congressman, Morarji Desai was deputy prime minister at the time I became a journalist. Every evening you could, in those days anybody could just walk into the house. So I walked and he would be spinning cotton every day. And it was considered the appropriate thing to do because they said, the number of jobs created. If you have a machine producing this yarn, one machine will create as much as 10,000 individual hand spinners. Equally, the weaving, if you put on a weaving machine, enormous amounts of cloth can be produced with a modest investment, whereas the handloom will employ many more people. So what happened was, we had one of the best textile industries at the end of World War II. We could have gone to town on that. And later on, the Japanese went to town on textiles. Later on, it was Korea, Hancock, everybody else. India was the only one that went in the opposite direction. We decided basically that we are going to promote employment by going for handspun and handloom. There was a ceiling put on the number of meters any company could produce back in the late 1950s. Then there was a tax, rising tax on mill made, which was not there on machine made. Which was not, the handmade stuff was not taxed like the mill made. Then there was a point when the mills all had to produce something called janta cloth, ultra cheap cloth for the masses. So in a series of ways, the political thing was to move production away from the machine made to the handmade. So in one way, you may say it was an enormous success because they killed all the mills. On the other hand, you might say, what is the stupid policy that you are killing all your mills, which is the fundamental thing? So this again became one of the things of where we got very mixed up with the norms of the independence movement and the whole business of planning. There was no equal competition. So that is one example of what can go seriously wrong. The other thing on self-sufficiency, I told you, you'll suddenly find that I can't import anything because I'm so dependent on foreign aid. How do you become? So, but nevertheless, this fascination with self-sufficiency has been there because people feel that a self-sufficient, I am better off. If, for instance, financially you're self-sufficient, you feel much better off. If you feel financially I'm not, you don't. If I have my own land, I feel I'm better off. If I'm dependent on other land and I'm just hiring it, you don't feel you're better off. So there is this notion of a self-sufficient person is better off without understanding the importance of trade. When you get into trade, then the importance comes in. In the old days, if there was a drought in an area and you failed, there was no way of bringing grain from surplus areas into these villages which had no pakka road, nothing. Entire villages used to get up, lock up their things and move on to other places to where the food was. So these kinds of things were, so self-sufficiency, when you talk about self-sufficiency, that was the problem of self-sufficiency. If on the other hand, you say, I produce only one thing and buy everything else, that's what I do. What do I produce? I only produce journalistic articles. What do I consume? I consume 10,000 things. How am I doing this? I am doing this by trading. Am I better off this way? Obviously, I am better off this way. But this is not the way people see it. So anyway, this Atmanirbhar has come up. This again is tied up with the politics of we are going to become a great nation. The notion that a self-sufficient nation is somehow better off, which is not the case. I mean, China took off entirely on the basis of fantastic trade. Now, of course, at the same time, the domestic consumption rose also, both rose. So it's not as though domestic consumption did not rise. But to say that I will buy and sell, and currently China in some years has had a very large trade surplus, but in other years not. And it has a deficit on services. So the notion of Atmanirbhar, it sounds, to me I was I felt endangered when Modi announced it. But then you see, the confusion in the mind became obvious. He says, I want to produce not only for India, but for other countries also. At which point it was no longer Atmanirbhar. Because then the question was, if you are exporting, why are you exporting? Presumably in order to import. If you are exporting just to put gold into your vault, which you will never use, This is what's called mercantilism. This will not make you better off or richer off. We already have a certain amount of gold in our reserves. Does it make you better? Does it make the nation better off or any of? Not really. It's just one of many foreign exchanges. So being self-sufficient is not a good policy. It is better to be interdependent. I think Modi understands that. But he uses the word Atmanirbhar because it placates the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, it placates the RSS, his way of dealing with them. At the same time, strategically, what is he doing? I mean, he is loosening. He says the private sector can now come in nuclear reactors, it can come into space, it can come into... I mean, he has really opened up that whole area. So the state's role, he has decreased very significantly, and he has realized the importance of entrepreneurship. But he's giving specific subsidies for some of these export areas. Overall, I would say the experiment was, in principle I objected, but I said the sums involved are trivial. And they have not been able to spend the money because there are a certain number of conditions. And there was one single success in the case of Apple, which is now endangered by Mr. Trump. But there was one single success. Apart from that, if you look at the other 13 of the 14 sectors, there is nothing much to talk about. So you may say it's partly because the idea failed. I could also say in some way the idea succeeded. There were actually fairly tough conditions attached. It wasn't that I just hand the money out. If you do, and the moment you looked at those conditions, it was more difficult to do than you thought. So all I can say is that there is this demand for Atmanirbhar, but interdependence is important. On the other hand, if we have a world where geopolitics is coming in and China can cut this off, Daffalo can cut it off, then there will be certain strategic areas which you will want to develop. So if you say right now that I am dependent on China for 80% of my bulk chemicals, you say I should trade that. If you say you're dependent on China for 90% of your solar things, you may say there is a case for development. So with massive subsidies, setting up getting the scale economies, I have no objection to that. Right? But you are targeting areas specifically for strategic reasons, knowing that it may not be the most economic. You will be paying more for solar panels. But it is worthwhile not to get into a situation where it can suddenly be cut off. Right? For strategic reasons, you need to have a certain amount of self-sufficiency. The only thing is, please don't overdo it. Mr. Trump claims that all steel is strategic, all aluminum is strategic, all cars are strategic, anything strategic. And on this ground he's doing it, so don't exaggerate.
As you mentioned that the Western world is like, the Western countries are focusing on the household consumption surveys as well as the administrative data for poverty rates. So I want to bring this to your attention that the Ministry of Statistics, so I'm currently working with them. So Ministry of Statistics is also trying to do that. So I am actually working on that project. Statistics, yeah. So yeah. So they are also currently doing that. One of the divisions with I am working with, they are actually trying to do that so that we can looking out of the administrative data that is collected by the different ministries on particular schemes, and then comparing the data with the household surveys, and not only for the household surveys, for PLFS as well as the other surveys as well. So to find out like if there are any loopholes, or we can add some questions, we can change, as you mentioned that the questions are not very good, so we can just modify some questions and do certain things. So maybe I guess if we can work on that direction, we actually able to come up with.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, this is in some way a way of checking people who tell lies.
Yeah.
So I said, if the number of motorcycles sold is double the number of motorcycles which people admit to having. No, there are in fact other technical things. I mean, if I bought a motorcycle this year, it is shown as my consumption. But I am using the motorcycle the next 10 years, and please, it's consumption, but it's not shown as part of my consumption. Technically speaking, you should be taking the depreciated value for each year as being part of your consumption, which would be one way of doing. No, Mr. Saurabh Garg knows all about this. But all I'm saying is these are some of the technical issues. As people are eating more than chana dal and rice, the moment you get to durable goods, there's a problem. The fridge will last for 25 years, 40 years. The motorcycle will last for so long. Various other, the television will last for so long. So the value of that, above all the smartphone now. I mean, a smartphone is not just a phone, it is a source, it has everything of the Encyclopedia Britannica, it has more information on the Indian economy than anything I could remember myself. Anything, and now of course you got your chat GPT, you can ask any question on anything and get a very decent summary. So it is an infinite source of knowledge. In fact, I now have to wonder what is the point of having a good memory at all. This is better than any person having a good memory. So fantastic amount of consumption, and you have no way of measuring it. In fact, Jason Furman, one of the top US economists, has been arguing that our entire GDP, everything, was historically made to measure goods. It was never devised for services. It has never been able to measure services in a meaningful way. And with the smartphone, it's become meaningless. So, we need to have some complete new rethinking on how we make our GDP data. Increasingly, GDP is said to be, in America, I think, 80%, 70-something percent services. So, and if you ask me, if you take the real value of smartphones and so on, services are up to 90%. It's everything. The artificial intelligence now coming in. Anyway, you see, again, statistics do not know how to deal with new goods. Right? You can say the price of a car has fallen by this much, but the video, I mean, originally even the Walkman, the Sony Walkman, where you had your thing, that was something, if it doesn't exist before and becomes very large, your statistics does not know how to measure the fall in price, because it was not there at all. So how do you measure the fall in price? And the number of new items, new goods has been multiplying. And the old ones, in fact, keep getting obsolete. I mean, forget the Walkman, then the Walk disc came, then the VHS came, then everything has become obsolete. And now everything is on the net. You get it as a service. So there are huge problems in measuring things that are free. And now increasingly a huge number of things are free. So just technically, since you are dealing with that particular system, you can become a great innovator if you can get out of the current system and think afresh. Is there some completely new way to think about this, to measure them?
And I have one more question. As you said that, in the beginning you were saying that now the change, now we are economically more stable, but not politically. So, and as we know, the current things going on with the judiciary, we have found some judges being found some cash on at their homes. So do you really think that India really needs some reforms for judiciary? And how can we, who can check the judiciary?
Reform on the political side.
Of the judiciary.
Judiciary. You cannot impose, I mean, this has been tried. Actually, reforms of the judiciary in terms of increasing the speed has been regarded as one of the most important things the world over. So it is not only in India that we have these delays, in some cases going 50 years. It has happened elsewhere. Countries the world over have attempted to speed up their judicial processes. I read one survey, every single effort failed, without exception. The conclusion was that judicial processes are ultimately created by judicial decisions and precedent. Thus, the judiciary creates its own processes and they cannot be imposed. And if ever you attempt to impose something from outside, the judges will take a series of decisions and that then will become the norm. So in other words, fundamentally you may try to impose things, but the only way to do it is to internalize it. From which my conclusion is very clear. Therefore, you need to make it in the Right now, if a judge hastens up a case but makes a small mistake, he may get demoted. But if he says, I don't care how long it takes, but I'm sticking to every possible procedure and giving ultimate latitude, nothing happens to him. The incentive structure is wrong. So if you say that the speed of disposal of cases, the number of days you appear, judicial disappearances and fellows going on leave is huge. So if all these factors are made important conditions for promotion, then the judiciary on its own will devise procedures which make everything faster, because that becomes in the personal interest of every individual judge. So if you ask me, that is the way to go. I once suggested this to Arun Jaitley when he was in law ministry, and he had a good laugh as though it's a good idea, but he was unwilling to even think of imposing this kind of system on the judiciary. And the judiciary resisted any change, they will go on strike. And if you try to do it, I mean, the lawyers are part of the system and they will go on strike. And then people say that, we can't afford to have the courts stuck for 2 months, 3 months, and people give way. This then becomes the politics of the system. So all I can say is that it's a problem in a great many countries. It's a problem here too.
Sandeep. Sir, my question is, how AI is going to affect...
Sir, please come closer. I'm very hard of hearing.
How AI is going to affect Indian economy and employment?
How?
AI, artificial intelligence. AI.
Artificial intelligence.
Because sir, today we are the most populated country in the world, and many multinational companies in India firing their employees and switching to the AI-based system for the back-end type of jobs. So, Indian government make a policy minimum minimum man-force employees type of policy for the companies or not.
This is the kind of, okay. I have to tell you that the moment there has been any labor-saving thing, this kind of protest has come. For the very first time when the textile mills came, instead of handloom and so on, there were people who went out to break all the textile machinery saying, all the jobs will disappear. So this has happened with mechanization that has taken place. Every form of mechanization takes jobs away in the short run of that. But overall efficiencies that are created, it increases the standard of living, and if everybody is then spending more money, then there is more employment in food processing, in Coca-Cola, or traveling to anywhere. So we have found that in practice, don't worry, there is an there are an infinite number of work to be done. If you provide a high enough incentive, there is infinite amount of work to be. But if a low-tech thing is replaced by a high-tech thing, it is good for the economy. It is bad for those guys short term. It would be very good for their children, although they may not realize it. Like if I was a handloom weaver and I had been stuck doing handloom weaving for the last 200 years, I'm not better off. You have preserved my job, but I'm not better off. So this would apply equal to artificial intelligence. It is just one more form of mechanization, like all those preceding.
Sorry.
I love your view on understanding how much autonomy has changed among corporates in India. Because as far as I know, you have the large time scale starting 50s, 60s, and 70s. So, how are corporate houses becoming? What is the trend? For instance, what worries me right now is how the government can start tuning up corporates on how they do their governance, especially how they spend their CSR money. That's like something big in everyone's heads. So I would love your commentary on where do you see the trend going, and if there's something which worries you at all.
No, without doubt, the liberalization that has taken place has been very good for the country, and it has made up for a lot of problems that we have elsewhere. The thing is that there is a clear impression that if your name is Adani or Ambani, you will have an advantage over Aiyar. So, In fact, one of Rahul Gandhi's rare good jokes. He says BJP has now adopted the old Congress slogan of "Hum do, hamare do." Sort of, "Hum do" is Narendra Modi and Amit Shah, and "Hamare do" is Adani. So there is this clear perception of favors being given to some people which are not available to others. Now, liberalization is about free competition. It's not about guided. On the other hand, there is the argument that if you look at Korea, Taiwan, many of these, there was huge government support given to some fellows who then became world class. And without that government support, you would not have been able to rise from zero to become somebody competitive with international companies. So for some time you need this. And in Korea or in Taiwan or other, did you have corruption? Was there a kickback? Yes, all of this took place there too. But yet it would appear in those particular cases it worked, because if you're a small country and you want to set up a world-class plant, you will necessarily have to export. So because of the export obligation, those turned out to be efficient. Whereas in the case of India, if it is for Atmanirbhar, you can be promoting highly inefficient things, especially in things like infrastructure and so on, because there is no international composition. So this was the fear. And as to how it's actually going, so in India, basically there is no formal announcement that we are following the South Korean model. No formal announcement. They will deny it if you say you are following the chaebol model. These large conglomerates in South Korea were called the chaebol. So I wrote about the subtle chaebolization of India. And it's not just Adani and Ambani. Tata is very much there. In fact, Tata is the biggest of the three. But we now have a big three. And those three are bigger than anybody else. There is a second, then you will, after next thing you will get Bajaj, Birla, Airtel, JSW. So, those guys will come in the second tier. But the big three, the biggest by far is Tata, Ambani and Adani. And I remember in one particular case, they said, how can you justify such a high price for an Adani share? And they said, sir, Adani Power gets paid in 60 days. And no other power producer gets paid in less than 270. So if you have just something, the government, all the state discoms, they are supposed to be paying within 60 days. But they just don't pay. And at 270 days, they said, I will pay you provided you waive the penalties. And so at the end of it all, that poor producer has to accept late payment, and all the legal dues for the delay are waived. And Mr. Ambani can get paid in 60 days. You have broken no law, no formal favor. He has been paid on time. That turns out to be a favor. So there are various ways in which these guys are being favored. But when I see the scale, but two things I will say. In India, unless you are, there are 1,000 thieves. There are 1,000 people willing to bribe. There are 1,000 people willing to provide money, girls, khana, this, that, and the other. Anybody who is able to beat all the others has to be very clever and very good. Because the competition is so huge at the state level. So, as I said, it is not enough to be crooked. You must be crooked and competent if you are to rise. So within this thing, if the way Adani has come, what did he have to begin with? He had nothing. His father had this little oil mills. That's all. So he was importing edible oil. So from somebody who was competing with Dalda, he has risen to this particular thing within one generation. You have to be fantastically good to achieve that, no matter how many favors you get. After all, when Birlas were there, did not they get 1,000 favors? Sir, they had such good contacts. How have they been overtaken so easily? Dalmia, Jain, Bennett, my newspaper, they used to be number 3 in India at independence. The entire industrial empire has disappeared. What has remained is the newspaper, which was originally bought as the propaganda arm of the industrial empire. It's very funny. That's the only thing that still remains viable, and the industrial empire is gone. Used to be the biggest producers of vanaspati, biggest producers of cement in the whole of India. So, if you are not competent in this country, you cannot survive long. The competition is fierce. So it says, I will bribe about this, everybody is willing to do that. So if despite all this somebody rises, it's very clear to me that you are competent. And those who are not competent can go downhill very fast. Mr. Mukesh and Anil Ambani had an equally divided empire in 2005. One fellow rose like this, one fellow fell like this. And Rahul Gandhi will keep screaming, "Ah, Rafael, you've given so much money to Anil Ambani." They say, in that case, why is he bust? So this is a country where at the end of it all, competition matters. There are favors, some guys gain. The political system demands money. So there is a huge amount of corruption within it still. There is not the slightest doubt. But as I said, the bribes everybody is willing to give. That is not, bribes do not single out Mr. Adani from Popatulal or the local panwala. Everybody is willing to pay. The difference is that you have to be competent as well. So I'm happy to say that because of this, the really big guys that we have, it's not like in some Latin American countries where you just sit and big monopoly and you swallow it all. We have our own strange ways of working things out.
So my question is, as country becomes more developed, price or profit and interest often reduce. But why often got reduced?
Reduce?
Yeah. But why rent is still high?
No, I see no obvious reason for profits or interest to I mean, when a country gets developed, if you say the profits become higher, the share of profits, you mean, in GDP or what? What are you referring to? Share of profits in GDP?
Yeah.
And when you say interest, what do you mean by interest? Interest as a proportion of what?
So interest means the interest rate.
The rate of interest. Okay. The rate of interest typically is related to the rate of inflation, right? Especially the way we have central banks. So countries, sorry, is there a problem? I have seen historically, there are some people who look at the share of capital, of profits and share of wages. This has been one thing of distribution. And they say over time, the share of capital has gone up and the share of labor is going down, and this is held to be something very wrong, which is disturbing. Doesn't disturb me at all, because as something becomes more capital intensive, surely the contribution of capital is more than that of labor. If the share of contribution of capital is more than labor, why should the ratio of returns to the two remain the same? So to me, it is not logical that the share of, I understand that the share of that labor will get some of the gains, but I see no reason for the entire gains to be taken by labor so that the ratio remains unchanged. So yes, the ratio of, as you get developed, the share of profits will tend to rise compared with things, except in some exceptional circumstances. For instance, in the USA, between World War II and 1970, 1980, the economies were booming because it was the only big economy. Everything else had been crushed by World War II. It was in ruins. In those conditions, the American trade unions became very powerful. In effect, they were running global monopolies in a very large number of areas, and they could demand more and more. And that's how the American car industries, this is because are earning $40 an hour. And then you discovered that Japan is willing to produce the same thing at $10 an hour. And the competition came up, and the Japanese companies started making factories in America. And they said, we will go in non-unionized areas at $16 an hour. So basically, Detroit got spoiled and other things came up. So you will get all these changes in an economy. An economy that is large and developed typically is one that has done its overall governance so well that inflation will be well under control. We have examples like of hyperinflation in some countries. The United States had very high rates of inflation in the 1970s. So it's not that the developed economy can't have it. But the way we have arranged our central banks and the inflation targeting today, they tend to get the inflation under control. And if the inflation is low, the interest rate will be correspondingly lower. One is linked to the other. Typically, you have to offer a real rate of interest. The rate of interest needs to be higher than the rate of inflation. But if the rate of inflation comes down, the rate of interest should also come down. That is what happens.
My question is, what in your view is the single most important reform that India needs today to unlock its next phase of growth? This is in context of what the government talks about the Viksit Bharat at 2047, sir.
Viksit Bharat is a convenient political target. Mr. Modi will be dead by that time, I will be dead by that time. So it's a political target. And who says that the BJP will be in power then? I'm sure if Rahul Gandhi will say, no, it will be Viksit Bharat by 2040. I mean, whatever, but he will not be able to agree to the same. These are political targets. So it is certainly true that, if you want to reach that target, you would have to increase our growth rate to 8% or 8% plus. Is it going to happen? No. And why is it not going to happen? Because we know what is to be done, but the political costs are too high. Do you want to reform agriculture? You saw what happened when he tried just the first step. It failed. Earlier on, he tried to liberalize land acquisition. There was a huge backlash, given up. I mean, just the land acquisition for Mr. Modi's pet project, bullet train between Bombay and Ahmedabad. 10 years it has taken for land acquisition. 10 years for the Prime Minister's pet project. And yet you dare to reform this, and there's a problem. So what's happened is, yes, in the famous words of Claude Juncker, who is in the European Union, we all know what is to be done. What we do not know is how to get elected after doing it. So this fundamentally is the problem that we face. So if you want to get to 8% growth, we know what is to be done. But right now, I would say the BJP is saying, I am getting re-elected, I am doing a comfortable 6.57%. Okay, I may not reach that target, but why should I risk my majority and incur political risks just in order to say there's some Viksit Bharat target? Everybody will subscribe to it because we will all be dead by that time. So it's no difficulty in subscribing to the target. But in terms of what is to be done, if you say what is to be done to increase your growth rate, we all know what is to be done and they don't want to do it. I have to add that even in terms of lower level thing, corruption is now fully entrenched at all levels because getting elected is very expensive. The last election we went around and in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, every candidate school, I'm spending 40 crores, he's spending 40 crores. Can you afford to spend so much? He says, you have to be a crorepati in order to run. I mean, that's the state of affairs. And if you're investing 40 crores in being elected, what is the rate of return you expect? You have to make some money on, you can't just spend your money on these things. You're not a charitable institution. So as I said, a lot of it is done by land. Things of various kinds. Either you collect money for approvals on land or you indulge in land speculation. Every MLA owns lands and flats. One famous example I give is Navi Mumbai Airport being constructed for 15,000 crores. A lot of agitation on people's displacement, mangrove forest, blah, blah, blah. Along came a European company saying the new trend to avoid these problems is to have an artificial island. And you build the airport on that. In Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, all of these places are building new airports on islands. So in Thana Creek, near Bombay, I can build you, if you have a low-level island and high walls to keep out the sea surges, as little as 3,000 crores. Or if you want the ground itself to be high, 7,000 crores, half the cost. When it went up, the proposal went up to a new chief minister, Prithviraj Chauhan, who had just been sent by Sonia Gandhi from Delhi to become chief minister because apparently corruption was so high. And the immediate reaction of the cabinet and everybody else in the Congress was, What a stupid idea. He said, all of us have bought land all around Navi Mumbai airport. Because this is how you make. I mean, you know that a project is there, you have access to money and you borrow it and you buy land. Huge amounts are to be made. So now that we bought the land, what will happen if you don't have the airport? You want to bankrupt all of us. So for that reason alone, they said, just forget about alternative things. And the saving of cost, who benefits? Who will really, it will get spread. You will lower your deficit financing by that much. No deficit. And I will have to tell a story which is probably untrue. But one apparently said, what a stupid project. There is no land around it. It's an island. So, there's a politics is expensive, takes a lot of money, there has to be a return on it, money is required. This remains a significant barrier to a lot of reforms, including very simple reforms which will take away the power to do this. You will say in future all islands or airports on islands, how much money you will save? Okay.
Sir, thank you so much for coming. And I have one question, which is that recently there is this idea of minimum government and maximum governance is coming around by the BJP government. And how do you think policies should be made to ensure it, or will that minimum government and maximum governance will lead to something more transparent or accountable in the policies? Will it help?
No. How will you finance your elections? How will a MP, if you say, sorry, you can sit down there. So in theory, a country is well governed with the minimum governance. But I mean, there will always be a gray area on where exactly this is. But part of the reason is to make money. If you have no rules, how do you make money? You make money out of the rules, out of the clearances, out of this, that, and the other. So for that reason, we never get anywhere near minimal governance. Over and above that, there will be political issues, like you saw in the farmers' reform. They refused to do it. So even if you wanted to liberalize agriculture, they did not want to lose all the subsidies involved. So there are a large number of reforms which you cannot do because the beneficiaries are too powerful for you to reform it. So all of these are theoretical propositions of maximum freedom and minimum governance, maximum freedom. It never works out. Please, when you go abroad, you will find in apparently free societies a huge number of regulations there too. If you try to, I mean, as I have done, you try to buy a property in America, oh my God, thousands and thousands of words you have to go through, dozens of documents you have to sign, this regulation, that, all kinds of regulations, but it all goes through in 2 seconds, all done electronically like this. So while on the one hand the regulation is done, it is not used as a device to get rid of all the clearances. No, within India, digitalization has brought down delays and corruption in some areas. And it will deliberately not be there in some other areas because people do not want to do it. In the column I wrote last week, I say, especially in state governments, even on things like a solar park, a standalone solar park, they say for the 60% of the clearances, there has to be a physical submission. Now, if everything was digitalized, there will be no scope. But if everything is dependent on physical submission of documents and the man accepting them. I remember when our press enclave where I live, the architect went to submit the documents at the DDA. The man said nothing, but he wouldn't take the document either. He was waiting. Basically, he was going to take it only if he was spared. So, you have these sad state of affairs. In the case of income tax, I'm told a very major important reform has now been done. The income tax officer dealing with you, he does not know your name, you do not know his name. So he can't ask you for money and you can't pay him. And if there is a judgment you wish to appeal against, it goes to a third person who does not know either of the first two. So all this is possible if you want to cut out the delays, if you want to, because it can be done. Digitalization is a great thing and it has worked partly. But I'm afraid they will not allow the system to be totally free because they will lose their capacity to make money.
Want to know, can India become corruption free? That's a very broad question. I totally understand. And because Lokpal Niti and there is no accountability, and because there is also concentration of power, like before this, we were having a discussion where it was mentioned how just to sign a document, there are many bribes taken. So, is there a solution to it? Even, I don't think a solution can be given straight away.
No, I'm just saying digitalization has been a huge improvement. There are various, if you are serious about it, there are technical fixes. For instance, there was to ensure teacher education, to ensure that teachers are present. They started saying we will have cameras in schools to monitor. Then they would find that either camera will be out of order or somebody has accidentally put their shirt on top of it. So, at the end of it all, the system has to react. If people feel that their complaints will be listened to, it will work. If the system says, ultimately, we can't allow to liberalize this too much, or we don't want to antagonize it will not work. So the culture will have to change. It can be changed as people get richer, and sometimes it gets better. And again, if everybody is digitalized and artificial intelligence is monitoring, or there are various ways of doing it if you're serious. Our main problem is we're not serious.
My question is कि government says कि our economy growth is more than 4 trillion, मतलब कि हमने जापान को भी पछाड़ दिया है, but our per capita income is not increased. So what's your?
No, per capita income is increasing very much. I would say per capita income is probably close to 3,000, and it used to be only in 1990 when the reforms were beginning. Per capita income is only $360. It's now 3,000. So it's up a lot.
So when I was in Chennai, there was this one policy came across which allowed parents to submit their unwanted girl child instead of killing the girl child. So I just want to ask you, do you think there's a huge economic cost that stops us from scaling this policy nationwide? And is there a matter of political readiness or some societal readiness that is not allowing us to do this, something that was actually considered successful?
No. Historically, because of our dowry, a girl child was considered a financial burden, whereas a boy child was an asset. So one reason in various poor areas, one solution became female infanticide, and it became female, and because they said, we don't want to go broke. So if your social customs are that way, you need to change those social customs. Now, of course, instead of having female infanticide, there is feticide. So you will have a sonogram and you discover you are pregnant, or you can even discover the sex of the child now. And you will then have a selective thing. So when you say, how do you change it, you will have to change the way that society thinks. You cannot enforce this from outside.
Thank you very much. On that socialist note, there is a great Indian liberal wall, and we have a plaque on Indian liberals. This is something that we would like to share with you. Ayushi? I think this also features Swami in it. We'll remove it. We should get a picture.